You're the bottleneck. The room went quiet the second he said it. It was 6:40 p.m., and we were still in the main production conference room on the 14th floor. Most people had already stayed late. The screens were still glowing. Half-empty coffee cups sat in front of tired faces. And right there, at the head of the table, our CEO leaned forward like he had just said something clever. "You're slowing the team down, Daniel," he added, this time slower, like he wanted every person in that room to hear it clearly. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, hands folded, eyes steady on him. I had been in that same room for almost 2 decades. Same chair, same long table, same glass walls. I had seen leadership come and go. I had sat through good quarters and bad ones. But I had never been spoken to like that. Not in front of everyone. Not like I was the problem. Across the table, I caught a quick glance from a few people. Some looked down. Some looked away. A couple of junior analysts shifted in their seats like they weren't sure where to look. And then there was Ryan Cole. He didn't look away. He leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed, a small smile sitting on his face like he had been waiting for this moment. Ryan had been with the company for 6 months. 6. And somehow, he was already leading this meeting. "Our current process is outdated," Ryan said, picking up right where the CEO left off. His voice was smooth, confident, practiced. "We're moving too slow. We need automation, real-time execution, not manual oversight at every step." Manual oversight. That was his way of saying me. I leaned forward just slightly. "It's not manual oversight," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's control points. There are parts of the system that—" "Daniel," the CEO cut in, raising a hand without even looking at me. "We've heard this before." That stung more than the first line. Because it wasn't just dismissal. It was erasing. I sat back again. Ryan clicked to the next slide. Charts, timelines, clean lines, and bold numbers. A whole new system mapped out like it had always been obvious. Like everything we had built before was just something to replace. "We can reduce processing time by 32%, Ryan said. "Cut operational lag. Improve scalability. This is what growth looks like." People nodded. Of course they did. On paper, it all looked perfect, but paper doesn't show failure points. It doesn't show what happens when things go wrong at scale. It doesn't show the quiet safeguards that keep everything from breaking at once. I knew those safeguards, because I built most of them. "Have you tested this under full load?" I asked. Ryan didn't even look at me this time. "We've run simulations." "That's not the same thing." The CEO leaned forward again. "We are not here to slow this down with more what-ifs, Daniel. We are here to move forward." There was again. Slow. Like that was my only role. Like the last 18 years meant nothing more than delay. "We're implementing phase 1 tonight," Ryan said. "Partial deployment into production. Tonight." I felt that settle in my chest. "That's too fast," I said. "You're skipping validation layers. If something breaks, it won't fail clean. It'll spread." Ryan finally looked at me then. "Or it won't break." A few quiet chuckles moved around the table. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. The CEO stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "We're done here. Ryan, proceed as planned." And then he looked at me one last time. "If you can't keep up, Daniel, we'll find someone who can." That was it. No discussion. No room to respond. Just a decision already made. People started gathering their things. Chairs moved. Laptops closed. Conversations started in low voices. I stayed seated for a few seconds longer, just watching the room empty out. Ryan walked past me on his way out. "Nothing personal," he said, almost casually. I didn't answer him, because it wasn't personal to him, but it was everything to me. By the time I got back to my desk, it was already after 7:30. The office floor was quiet. Most of the lights had dimmed. Just a few people left, scattered across the rows. I sat down and opened my system dashboard. At first, everything looked normal. Then I saw it. New processes spinning up. Permissions being changed. Core validation checks being bypassed. Not disabled completely. Just moved. Adjusted. Like someone was trying to go faster without fully understanding what those pieces were doing. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. They had already started. No review. No full sign-off. No final check from me. For the first time in 18 years. Production was moving without my control, and something about the way those changes were being pushed. It didn't feel fast. It felt reckless. I didn't say anything. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, watching the system I had spent almost half my life building, being changed in real time, without me. And for the first time, I didn't reach in to stop it. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 47 years old, and for 18 years, I was the one person in that company who understood how everything actually worked. Not on paper, not in slides, in reality. I started there when the company was still small enough that people knew each other's names. Back when systems weren't clean or polished. Back when things broke often and fixing them meant staying late, digging through logs, and figuring things out with whatever tools you had. I wasn't brought in to lead. I wasn't even brought in to build anything big. I was just there to keep things running. And over time, that's exactly what I did. Every time something failed, I was there. Every time a process didn't scale, I adjusted it. Every time a client needed something specific, I found a way to make it work without breaking everything else. Piece by piece, I built layers into the system. Not visible ones. Not the kind you show in a presentation. Quiet layers. Checks that caught errors before they spread. Fallback paths that kept operations moving when something went wrong. Manual review points where automation would have made the wrong decision. Most of it wasn't documented. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I was the one maintaining it. If something needed to be changed, I knew where to go. If something failed, I knew why. That kind of knowledge doesn't live in documents. It lives in experience. And over 18 years, that experience became the difference between things working and everything falling apart. The system looked smooth from the outside. Orders came in, data moved, reports generated, clients stayed happy. But under that surface, it was delicate, like a machine that had been tuned by hand over and over again until it worked just right. You couldn't just replace parts of it overnight, not without understanding how everything connected. I tried to explain that more than once. But somewhere along the way, the company changed. Leadership changed. We grew faster. Bigger clients. Bigger expectations. And with that came a different kind of thinking. Speed. Efficiency. Optimization. All words that sound good in meetings. But those words don't always respect reality. Especially not in systems like ours. Ryan Cole represented that shift perfectly. He came in with a clean resume. Top school. Big consulting firm. The kind of background that looks impressive in a boardroom. And to be fair, he was smart. He understood numbers. He understood how to present ideas. But he didn't understand the system. Not really, because understanding it would have taken time. And time was exactly what he was trying to remove. At first, I thought we could work together. I walked him through parts of the system, showed him where things were sensitive, where we needed to be careful. He listened, nodded, took notes, and then slowly, he stopped asking. Meetings started happening without me. Decisions were made in rooms I wasn't invited into. Emails stopped including me on threads I used to lead. At first, I told myself it was just restructuring. New leadership, new approach. But then my access started changing. Small things. Permissions adjusted. Certain controls moved to shared ownership, which usually means no one really owns them anymore. I raised concerns. Calmly, directly. This part can't be automated yet, I said in one meeting. There's too much risk. We'll monitor it, Ryan replied. Monitoring doesn't stop failure. It just tells you when it's already happening. Still, I didn't push too hard. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew how this usually goes. Once leadership decides on a direction, they don't want resistance. They want alignment. And if you keep pushing, you become the problem. By the time that meeting happened, the one where the CEO called me the bottleneck, I already knew where things were going. I just didn't expect it to happen like that. Not publicly. Not like I was disposable. That part stayed with me longer than I expected. Not anger. Just clarity. Because after 18 years, you start to understand something. Being needed is not the same as being valued. That night, sitting at my desk, watching those system changes go live without me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight for control anymore. I wasn't going to chase meetings I wasn't invited to. I wasn't going to argue with people who had already decided I was the problem. From that point on, I would do exactly what my role required. Nothing more. Nothing outside my scope. No silent fixes. No stepping in early to prevent problems no one else could see. If they wanted the system to run without me, then I was going to let it run. Exactly that way. And whatever happened next wouldn't be because I held it back. It would be because I finally stopped holding it together. Ryan Cole had a way of taking up space without raising his voice. That's what I noticed first. Even in meetings where he wasn't the most senior person, he acted like the room already belonged to him. Clean suit, perfect posture, always a slide deck ready like every conversation was just another pitch. He had been at the company for 6 months. But by then, he was already the face of change, and I was already being written out of it. It started small. My name disappearing from invite lists. Then meetings I used to lead started happening without me. Then decisions I built systems for were being made without me even knowing they were discussed. At first, I thought it was an accident, a shift in structure. But then I saw it clearly. It wasn't confusion. It was replacement. Ryan's plan was simple on the surface. He wanted to automate everything I had been managing manually for years. He called it modernization, but what it really meant was removal. He didn't say it directly at first. He framed it differently. We're moving towards scalable independence from key individuals, he said in one leadership session I was barely invited to. Key individuals. That was me. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it later from someone who still talked to me quietly in the hallway. After that, my role changed officially. Head of production systems to support advisor. It sounds harmless, but in corporate language, it means one thing. You don't lead anymore. You wait to be asked. And I wasn't being asked. Ryan's system was ambitious. I'll give him that. It aimed to replace manual checkpoints with automated decision layers, to remove human delay, to speed up execution across everything from order processing to data validation. On paper, it looked like progress, but I knew what wasn't on paper. Edge cases, failure chains, the small decisions that keep systems stable when something unexpected happens. Those weren't things you could automate easily. They were things you learned by watching systems break and fixing them at 2 a.m. when no one else understood what went wrong. I tried to explain that. Once, in a meeting, I barely got a full sentence in. If you remove this checkpoint, I said, pointing at the flow diagram, you're exposing the entire transaction layer to... We've already reviewed that, Ryan interrupted. His tone wasn't rude. Worse, it was final. Like my input was already accounted for and dismissed. The CEO nodded without looking at me. That was the moment I understood something had shifted permanently. After that, I stopped being included in planning discussions. But I wasn't fully removed either. That's the tricky part. They kept me in the system just enough to avoid questions, but far enough out that I couldn't influence anything. My access started shrinking quietly, one system at a time. A permission removed here. A dashboard read-only there, then audit visibility limited, then deployment approvals rerouted. Each change was small. Individually, they looked harmless. Together, they were isolating me from the very system I built. Ryan didn't need to argue with me anymore. He just needed a route around me. And that's what he did. He started presenting updates directly to the CEO. Fast progress, cleaner workflows, reduced dependency on legacy oversight. That last phrase always made me pause. Legacy oversight. That was another way of saying me. I could feel the direction clearly now. I wasn't being challenged. I was being phased out. One evening, I stayed late and checked the deployment logs. I saw something that made me sit still for a long time. Core validation routines I designed had been disabled in production. Not replaced, just turned off. That wasn't an upgrade. That was a gamble. I sent a message to Ryan. Short. Direct. These validations are critical. Removing them will create cascading risk under load. His reply came 10 minutes later. We've tested the system. It's stable. Let's not slow progress with theoretical concerns. Theoretical. That word stuck with me, because there was nothing theoretical about what I was warning them about. But I didn't push further. Not anymore. I had already learned how that would end. So I stopped trying to redirect them. And instead, I started documenting everything I was still officially responsible for. Carefully, quietly, not as a warning, but as a record, because at some point I realized something else. If they were going to move forward without understanding the system, then I needed to make sure there was at least a trace of what was being left behind. A few days later, I got an email titled, Role Clarification Update. It reassigned most of my responsibilities to Ryan's team. I wasn't surprised, but I still read every line. At the bottom, there was a sentence that felt like a closing door. Daniel will remain available for consult as needed. As needed. Not when necessary. Not when critical. As needed. That night, I sat alone in my office longer than usual. The floor was almost empty. Lights dimmed. Systems humming quietly around me like nothing was changing. But everything was. And I remember thinking something very clearly in that moment. If they truly believed I was holding the team back, then they were about to find out what happens when I stop holding it at all. The first call came at 3:18 a.m. I saw it on my phone, glowing in the dark room. Unknown number. Then another call. And another. By the fourth, I was already sitting up, staring at the screen without answering. I didn't need to pick up. I already knew what had happened. At 3:27 a.m., the company's system dashboard started lighting up with alerts. I had access to a read-only monitoring feed, just enough to observe, not intervene. Orders were failing. Not all at once. That would have been easier. Instead, it was slow, random failures across different modules. One region at a time, then another, like something inside the system was quietly breaking in layers. By 4 a.m., the internal chat channels were exploding. Transactions stuck. Inventory mismatch showing across regions. Payment confirmations not syncing. Is anyone else seeing this? Ryan Cole was active. I could see his messages. At first, confident. We're checking load balancing. Then less certain. Rolling back recent changes. Then silence for a few minutes. Then again. This is unexpected. That was the first time I felt something close to calm. Not satisfaction. Just confirmation. Because I knew exactly what they had removed. And I knew exactly how it would fail. I got up and made coffee. Not because I could fix anything, but because there was nothing for me to fix anymore. By 5:10 a.m., the CEO's assistant called. I didn't answer. Then again, and again. Finally, I picked up on the fourth try. There was no greeting, just urgency. Daniel, we need you online. Something is wrong with production. I stayed quiet for a second. Then I said, I'm not on production anymore. A pause. Just look at the system, she said. Please. And I did. It was worse than earlier. Now it wasn't just failures. It was cascading dependency collapse. One system error triggering another. Then another. Like a chain reaction that no one had accounted for. Orders weren't just delayed. They were corrupted. Some were half-processed. Some duplicated. Some vanished entirely from tracking. By 6 a.m., logistics teams were reporting shipments that no longer matched any record. Finance flagged inconsistencies in payment reconciliation. Customer support was overwhelmed. And leadership was finally silent. Except for Ryan. He was still trying. I could see his messages shifting tone in real time. We are isolating the issue. We are reverting recent deployments. Stand by. Then finally, we may need Daniel Mercer online ASAP. My name. First time it had appeared in a critical message all night. I didn't respond. I just watched. Because now the system was doing exactly what I had warned about. Without validation layers, it didn't fail in one place. It failed everywhere. Quietly. At scale. By 7:15 a.m., the CEO joined the emergency channel. The tone changed immediately. Short messages. Direct commands. Status update now. No more delays. Why is Mercer not on this call? Someone replied. He is not currently assigned to production systems. That message sat there longer than anything else. No one responded after that. But I knew what was happening behind the scenes. Panic doesn't always look loud in corporations. Sometimes it looks like silence between messages. At 8:02 a.m., the CEO called me directly. This time I answered. His voice was tight, controlled, but breaking at the edges. Daniel, what is happening? I looked at my screen, watched another batch of failures roll in. Then I said something simple. I think the system is doing exactly what it was told to do. Another pause. Don't play games, he said. We need you to fix this. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not because I was angry, but because they finally needed me in a way they couldn't replace. Still, I didn't rush. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'll take a look," and hung up, because now, for the first time in years, they were no longer in control of the pace. By 9 a.m., internal reports confirmed what I already knew. Production had effectively stopped. Not paused, not delayed, stopped. And the people who call me the bottleneck were now staring at a system they could no longer move at all. The emergency meeting started at 9:42 a.m. They brought me in through video. I didn't change my clothes, didn't adjust my tone. I just sat in my office chair and joined the call. On the screen, I could see everyone. The CEO at the center, Ryan slightly to the side, legal, operations, finance. No one looked comfortable. The CEO didn't waste time. "Explain it," he said. I nodded once, and I did. "Your system is failing because the safeguards that prevented cascading errors were removed," I said. Ryan leaned forward. "We replaced them with automated checks." I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "You replaced them with assumptions." That word hit differently. Assumptions. Because that's what it was. Assuming systems behave perfectly under pressure. Assuming edge cases don't exist. Assuming speed matters more than stability. I kept my voice calm. No anger. No blame. Just facts. When you remove validation layers in a system like this, I continued, errors don't stay isolated. They spread. One failure becomes 10, then 100. The finance director spoke up. "What's the financial impact right now?" Silence. Then someone said it. "Hundreds of thousands per hour." No one reacted immediately, because numbers like that don't feel real until they sit in the room long enough. Ryan finally spoke. "We can roll back to the previous version." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel pushed aside. I felt clear. "You can't roll back cleanly," I said. "The data is already corrupted in multiple layers." That was the moment his confidence started to break. Because now it wasn't theory. It was consequence. The CEO leaned forward again. "So what do we do?" That question changed the room. Because it was no longer about debate. It was about survival. I took a slow breath, then said, "I can stabilize it, but I need full control again. No parallel changes. No parallel decisions." Ryan immediately responded. "That would be reverting authority completely back to legacy structure." I looked at him, and this time my voice stayed steady. "It's not legacy," I said. "It's what still works." The room went quiet again. No one challenged that. Because they couldn't. The CEO rubbed his forehead, then looked around the table. No one else had an answer. Finally, he said, "Do it. Give him full control." Ryan didn't argue. Not anymore. Because the system had already proven what his plan could not. That speed without understanding doesn't create progress. It creates collapse. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just said, "Then I'll start immediately," and logged off the meeting. Not because I was being dramatic, but because now the work actually began. And for the first time since that meeting where I was called a bottleneck, they were no longer trying to move forward without me. They were waiting for me to hold it together again. I didn't go back in like a hero. There was no moment of satisfaction, no speech, no one waiting for me to prove anything. I just logged into the system at 10:08 a.m. and started reading the damage. That was the first step. Not fixing, understanding. Because you can't repair something this complex by rushing in. You have to see how far it broke first. The logs were worse than I expected. Not because the system failed, but because it failed in layers they never noticed. One broken process triggered another. That triggered data corruption in downstream systems, which then fed back into reporting tools that made everything look partially functional. From the outside, it probably looked like a slowdown, but inside it was chaos. I started isolating modules one by one. Carefully. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Just control. The first thing I did was stop the spread. Not fix anything yet. Just containment. Like closing doors in a burning building. By noon, some parts of the system started stabilizing. Not fully working, but no longer collapsing. That alone changed the tone in the company. I could feel it even through the messages coming in. Less panic. More watching. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if I could actually bring it back. Ryan didn't message me again. Not directly. He was gone from the conversation now. Not officially, but emotionally. I stayed in my office. Door closed. Coffee untouched. Screen glowing in front of me like the only thing that mattered in that moment. At one point, someone from operations asked if they should assist. I replied simply, "Don't touch anything. Let's stabilize." Because the worst thing they could do now was help the wrong way. Around 2:30 p.m., I started rebuilding validation layers. Not the old way. Not exactly, but close enough to restore safety. Step by step, I reintroduced the controls they removed. The system resisted at first. It always does when you bring structure back after chaos. But slowly, things began to settle. By late afternoon, order processing started returning. Not at full speed, but correctly. And in this work, correctness matters more than speed. Around 5 p.m., the CEO joined the monitoring channel again. He didn't speak at first, just watched the system metrics update in real time. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to, because now the results were speaking louder than anything else in that company. One by one, systems came back online. Clean, stable, controlled. Not fast, but right. At some point, I realized something strange. No one was interrupting me anymore. No one was pushing new ideas. No one was suggesting optimizations. They were just waiting, watching the person they called a bottleneck quietly rebuild the entire flow they had broken in a single night. By 7:40 p.m., production was fully restored. Not improved, not modernized, restored. There's a difference people only understand after things break badly enough. When everything finally stabilized, I leaned back in my chair for the first time that day. My hands were tired, my eyes burned, but the system was alive again. The CEO sent a short message. Status. I replied, stable, controlled, running. That was it. No celebration followed. No applause. No announcements. Just silence. And in that silence, something became very clear inside the company. They didn't lose production because of me. They lost it because they removed the one thing that kept it from collapsing. And now that it was back, everyone understood exactly how much had been sitting on my shoulders all along. The next morning felt different. Not loud, not chaotic, just quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. Emails started coming in again. Meetings were scheduled. Reports were generated. But underneath all of it, something had changed. People were careful now. Careful with decisions. Careful with assumptions. Careful with how they spoke about systems they used to think were simple. At 9:15 a.m., I was invited to a leadership meeting again. Same room, same table, but the energy was completely different. No one joked. No one leaned back comfortably. Even Ryan sat quietly near the edge, not speaking unless spoken to. The CEO looked at me for a long moment before saying anything. Then he said, "We underestimated what you were managing." I didn't respond right away, because that kind of sentence sounds simple, but it carries weight. Finally, I said, "You didn't see it because it wasn't visible." He nodded slowly. That was the closest thing to agreement I had heard from him in a long time. They offered changes after that. Recognition, restructuring, stronger role definitions, better authority alignment. But I could tell something important. They thought this was about position. It wasn't. It never was. It was about understanding, and they only understood it after it broke. When a meeting ended, I stayed behind for a moment. Most people left quickly, avoiding eye contact, not out of disrespect this time, but awareness. They had seen what happens when the system loses the person who actually knows how it works. As I gathered my things, the CEO stopped me near the door. "Daniel," he said, quieter now, "we should have listened earlier." I looked at him for a moment. Not angry, not emotional, just clear. People only listen when silence becomes expensive, I said. He didn't argue, because it was true. Outside, the office was already moving again, back to normal on the surface, but not underneath, because now everyone knew something they had ignored for years. Some systems don't run because of the structure. They run because someone understands the structure deeply enough to keep it alive. As I walked out that evening, I wasn't thinking about revenge, or victory, or even respect. I was thinking about something simpler. For 18 years, I was called a bottleneck. But the truth was different. I wasn't holding the team back. I was holding everything together. And when they finally removed me, they didn't speed things up. They stopped everything. And now, that they understood that nothing would ever go back to the way it was. Not for them, and not for me.